Rawr. Oh no, the FOV has changed. Aye.
For 3R isn't a very scary game. Fear has always been about blurring the line betwixt horror and action, being both a competent shooter with smart AI and full of delicious horror atmosphere, as well as having some interesting characterisations and characters. Characters who kind of make a comeback in for 3R. By kind of, I mean they have a character called Point Man, who has never really been seen before, and who has a beard. Who knew? And Paxton Fettal, making sure to have his current incarnation look and sound almost, but not quite, completely unlike Paxton Fettal. Jin Sun-Kwon, whom is also voiced by someone different, also looks almost nothing like the character from the first game.
The screen has gone very slightly grey and there's static noise. Ah!
Other things the first two Fear games did quite well was having quite believable enemy dialogue. Now it's like most other modern shooter games, with soldiers seemingly trained to use as ridiculous phraseology as possible so long as it is not real English. Yes, games makers, the military consultants are just making that stuff up. Another pointless concession to modern shooters is the regenerating health, limit of 2 weapons only, and the cover system which just doesn't gel with the game I'm playing. To be fair, I am somewhat biased in that I always thought an attach to cover button always worked best with a controller anyhow. I could always try it with a pad, but for the difficulty bloat. This is another point where for 3R puts action and horror in opposition. We're faced with a monster mash of too many enemies, worse, respawning enemies. An endless parade of enemies doesn't make good horror. To put the difficulty bloat into perspective, I play the original Fear on extreme difficulty, that's the highest of 4, and have a nice challenge, but it isn't difficult to the point of ridiculous. For 3R, well, I can just about manage in Commando, that's the middle difficulty of 3, and that's quite frustrating with the number of deaths suffered. Of course, completing for 3R opens up a new difficulty mode. Wait, no, there's nothing there. Or maybe there was, but I wasn't looking at it. It happened so quick. The 3R is all too eager to toss aside the horror setting and give you instead the dusty backstreet of genericness, but still occasionally drops you into a sewer filled with corpses just for fun. It will insist on removing any weapons you've picked up after every chapter, which is more than a little irritating. This much blood is a bit silly rather than scary, isn't it? The game has another annoying habit of making little sense. In the 2 earlier games, you have a good reason for being there. So does the Fear universe's equivalent of Weyland-Yutani, Armacam. In this game, well, not so much. They're trying to cover up... what, exactly? The hole that used to be a city? To cover up any evidence of Armacam's involvement with... wait, big hole in ground. All the soldiers? Perhaps to remove any evidence their experiments on the city... no, the city's gone, isn't it? The city's no longer there. Just leave. Let Point Man and Fettal do their jobs and sort it out. I just can't see a reason for Armacam to be there. Nor a reason for Armacam to want to stop our characters, who, on the onset at least, want the same thing. That is, to stop the abstracted puppet-like master baddie, Alma.
A whole terror intrinsic.
The 3R's scares fail for a variety of reasons, but I think most relevant is that the game is confused. Like I say, earlier games blurred the action-horror line, but 3R has these elements in opposition. For example, you can't really have a collection of bonuses for killing and looting, and maintain a horror atmosphere, since saying that you've cheerily leveled due to killing people with the shotgun, ultimate butcher reward, kind of ruins the atmosphere a little, as well as just plain missing the mark. The developers for 3R, who by the way aren't the same people as Fear and Fear 2, aren't so good at getting us to look where they want. So I was keeping myself more aware of things like screen effects rather than having that awareness receptive to the atmosphere. At times it seems the developers were aware of the problem and tried to separate out the horror and action sequences, but then realised that, in a way, that exacerbates the problem. Similar problems to the horror elements in Dead Space 2. In fact, the ending of the 3R is pretty much the same deal as Dead Space 2. Veins have appeared at the edges of the screen, the horror. The bunting! I'm looking the wrong way again, aren't I? Couldn't it wait for me to turn? No? Oh. The big shame is that the game is so very good looking, surprisingly so. I was impressed with Fear 2, and for 3R surpasses it. And surpasses it while still being able to run on similar hardware, as the console variations prove. Then they used that graphical prowess to make the same game a bunch of others already have, throwing out quite a bit of what made Fear, Fear, tailoring it to be more generic. In conclusion, The 3R is a pretty good shooter, but that's all it is. Whilst it sometimes has the veneer of a horror atmosphere, it doesn't do that part particularly successfully. Unfortunately, if you, like me, play Fear mostly because it's a playable shooter and has some horror in there, you'll be sorely disappointed. If that isn't so important, you'll have less to dislike.